Hi, my name is Michael Carter, and the day I lost everything didn't come with a storm or a crash. It came with a whisper. A single sheet of paper slid across a desk that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and ego. Daniel sat across from me, his tie loose, his jaw tight. He'd once been my mentor, the man I thought I owed my career to. That morning, though, his eyes carried none of the old warmth. They were sharp, cold, calculating, the kind of eyes that measured not worth, but threat. "You've been outshining me, Michael," he said, his voice flat as he tapped the termination letter. "And I can't have that." Those words didn't make sense at first. I thought he was joking, some dark attempt at humor after the biggest client win in the company's history. My client win. But he didn't smile. He didn't blink. He just watched me, waiting for me to break. I remember the blinds behind him, thin slats of metal that cut the sunlight into long, sharp bars across his face. They made him look like a man in a cage, though the truth was I was the one being locked away, dismissed, erased. My hands trembled as I picked up the letter. The company logo at the top felt like a seal of betrayal, each printed word colder than the next. Termination, effective immediately. No thanks, no acknowledgement, not even a false kindness. Just exile, clean and swift. "Daniel," I said, my voice cracking, "I gave this company everything. I gave you everything." He leaned back, folding his arms with a smug tilt of his mouth. "And that's the problem. You forgot your place. You made me look small." Small, that was the word he chose. And maybe it was the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. I gathered my belongings under his watchful eyes, a black pen with my initials engraved, a framed photo of my father, the man who taught me that honor was worth more than any paycheck, and the watch my wife had given me when I'd been promoted years earlier. "To mark the hours you'll conquer," she had said back then. I had believed her. The walk through the office was the longest I'd ever taken. Colleagues lifted their heads as I passed, their eyes wide, their mouths shut. No one spoke, no one dared. The air felt heavy, thick with silence and fear. I could almost hear the unspoken words. If it happened to him, it could happen to me. I wanted someone to stop me, to say it was a mistake, to offer a hand on my shoulder. But all I had was the weight of the box in my arms and the echo of my shoes against the sterile tiles. The elevator doors opened with a metallic sigh. I stepped inside, alone. The mirrored walls caught my reflection from every angle, distorting it, multiplying it. I saw a dozen versions of myself, all of them stunned, hollow, carrying the wreckage of a life I thought was secure. I pressed the button for the lobby, and as the doors slid shut, one question burned to the haze of humiliation and disbelief. Who am I if I am no longer him? The man in the corner office, the man who worked late, who chased numbers, who believed loyalty would be rewarded. That man had been erased with a single sentence. As the elevator descended, I touched the watch in my box, its face cold against my fingers. Time didn't stop. Time didn't care. But for me, in that moment, everything had. When the doors opened, I stepped out into a world that suddenly felt foreign. The air was too bright, the street too loud. And somewhere behind me, high above, Daniel sat in his office, smug in his victory. But he didn't know yet that victory was temporary. He didn't know that betrayal, once planted, grows roots deep and strong. That morning, I was a man stripped bare. But the story wasn't over. It had only just begun. When I look back now, it's almost embarrassing how easily I mistook exploitation for mentorship, manipulation for guidance. But at the time, Daniel was more than a boss. He was a man who had opened the door, who had believed in me when no one else would. I was 26 when I joined the firm. Young, eager, carrying the quiet pride of being the first in my family to wear a suit that wasn't rented for a funeral or a wedding. I can still smell the faint cologne I used back then, something cheap from a pharmacy, but it made me feel important, like I belonged. Daniel noticed me early. He had this way of making you feel chosen. "You've got fire in you, Michael," he told me one late night, when everyone else had gone home. I was bent over spreadsheets, trying to impress, and he stood there in the doorway, his tie loosened, his shadow stretching across the office carpet. "Don't lose it. Men like you go far." Those words were a drug. They carried me through the exhaustion of 2 a.m. coffee runs, through weekends spent at the office instead of at home with my wife, Emily. She used to wait up for me in those early years, dinner wrapped in foil, her eyes tired but supportive. "I know you're building something," she would whisper as I kissed her forehead. And I believed I was. The first promotion came fast. Daniel congratulated me with a clap on the back and a glass of whiskey in his office. He told me he saw a younger version of himself in me. That should have been the first red flag. I mistook it for honor. In reality, it was possession. The watch came then, Emily's gift, a sleek silver timepiece wrapped in velvet. "For every hour you're away from me," she said with a playful smile, "at least you'll know I'm counting with you." I promised that the hours would pay off, that the sacrifices would mean something. The ticking became the soundtrack of my ambition, its steady rhythm urging me forward. But slowly the cracks showed. Daniel had a habit of taking credit for ideas. A pitch I'd spent weeks perfecting became our pitch. A client relationship I had cultivated through patience and trust was introduced to the board as his triumph. He was smooth about it, so smooth that sometimes even I questioned whether I had imagined it. And when I did protest, he'd smile that thin smile and say, "Michael, we're a team. What's mine is yours. What's yours is mine." Emily noticed a change in me before I did. "You're never here anymore," she said one evening as I loosened my tie and collapsed onto the couch. The apartment smelled faintly of her cooking, though the food had gone cold. She had eaten alone again. "And when you are here, you're somewhere else." I brushed it off, telling her I was doing it for us, for the future. But deep down, I knew I was doing it for Daniel's approval, for that rare nod of respect he doled out like crumbs to the starving. Friends warned me, too. Over beers one Friday, my old college buddy Nate leaned across the table and said, "Carter, that guy's poison. He's going to bleed you dry and then toss you aside." I laughed it off, called it jealousy. But his words lingered, heavy as stones in my chest. The sacrifices stacked up, anniversaries missed, vacations canceled. Emily's laughter grew rarer, replaced by silence. The framed photo of my father on my desk, him in his work clothes, hands callous but proud, became a quiet judge. He had taught me that honor mattered above all. But what honor was there in chasing a man's shadow? The truth was, I was too far in, too invested to see clearly. Daniel dangled the promise of more, bigger accounts, higher positions, eventual partnership. Every time I felt the weight of exhaustion, he dangled the carrot just out of reach, and I kept running. There was one night I'll never forget. It was close to midnight, the office humming with the low buzz of the cleaning crew. Daniel poured 2 glasses of scotch and handed me one. "You know why I like you, Michael?" he asked, his voice low, conspiratorial. "Because you don't threaten me. You make me look good." I should have heard the truth in that sentence. I should have felt the blade already pressing against my back. Instead, I raised my glass and drank, mistaking insult for compliment. Looking back now, I realized I had built my entire career on sand. Every late night, every missed moment with Emily, every drop of sweat poured into the company, it all rested on a fragile foundation of Daniel's approval. And when the tide shifted, the whole thing crumbled. The watch ticked on, a metronome of wasted hours. My father's photos stared silently, reminding me of values I had betrayed. And Emily, her patience had begun to fray, though I didn't yet see how deep that fracture ran. If I had listened to warnings, the subtle shifts in her tone, the rare flare of doubt in my own chest, I might have seen the betrayal coming. I might have spared myself the humiliation, but I didn't. I pressed forward, blind with loyalty, deaf to the alarms. And that was my tragedy. Not that Daniel betrayed me, but that I gave him the map, the compass, and the keys to the kingdom. I handed him the blade. All he had to do was use it. Losing my job should have been just that, a professional setback, a bruise on the ego, a moment to recalibrate. That's what people told me later. But it wasn't just the loss of a paycheck. It was a collapse in identity I had poured every ounce of myself into. The first morning after, I woke up at 6 a.m. out of habit. My body was conditioned, my veins primed with the old rhythm of grind and hustle. I showered, shaved, even put on a tie before I realized there was nowhere to go, nowhere I was welcome. The watch on my wrist ticked loudly in the silence of the kitchen. Each second seemed to mock me. Not working, not working, not working. I yanked it off and placed it on the table. But even without it, I heard the phantom tick inside my skull. Emily watched me from across the counter, her coffee steaming, her eyes guarded. "Maybe this is a blessing," she said, stirring sugar into her mug. "You've been killing yourself for years." Her words were meant to comfort, but they struck me like a slap. Killing myself had been the point. I had believed the sacrifice would mean something. Without the grind, without Daniel's nod of approval, what was left of me? That day bled into the next, and then the next. Hours stretched long and empty. The framed photo of my father sat on the shelf, his steady gaze a cruel reminder. He had worked with his hands, built something tangible, left behind a reputation of honesty and grit. And here I was, sitting in the same clothes for days, scrolling through job postings I couldn't bring myself to apply for. The phone rang less. Friends who had once called to grab a drink or share advice now seemed busy. I understood. No one wants to catch the scent of failure. It clings. Emily grew restless. She started staying late at her own job, or so she said. Her excuses were casual, almost careless. A happy hour with colleagues, a networking dinner, a late-night project. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. Because if I admitted the doubt scratching at the back of my mind, then I had truly lost everything. One night, I sat in the living room with the lights off, the hum of the refrigerator, the only sound. My reflection stared back at me from the black television screen. My face was pale, unshaven, my eyes hollow. I looked like a ghost haunting my own life. That's when the phrase came to me, the hollow man. That was what I had become, a shell emptied of purpose, drifting through the rooms of a house that no longer felt like home. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. Emily's phone buzzed on the counter while she was in the shower. A message lit up the screen, her smiley face lock screen unable to soften the blow. "Daniel, same place tonight? I'll order your favorite." My breath caught. My hands went cold. For a long moment, I couldn't move, couldn't think. Then I scrolled up, my heart pounding louder than the watch I had abandoned on the kitchen table. The messages stretched back weeks. Dinner reservations. Inside jokes. Complaints about me. She emerged from the bathroom in a towel, her hair damp, her skin glowing from the steam. She froze when she saw me holding her phone. "Michael," she began, her voice tight. I read the message out loud, my throat dry, the words like shards of glass tearing free. "Same place tonight? He'll order your favorite." For a second, I saw guilt flicker across her face, then anger, then something colder. "It's not what you think." "Then what the hell is it?" My voice cracked, raw, desperate. "It's networking," she said, too quickly. "He has influence. I thought maybe he could help us." "Help you?" The lie was flimsy, but it was a final insult that shattered me. Networking. As if the man who had gutted me in that sterile office was now the lifeline she clung to. The rage that rose in me was volcanic. I wanted to scream, to break something, to drag Daniel's smug face through the mud he had buried me in, but the anger lasted only a moment before it collapsed into grief. I sat down hard on the couch, my hand shaking. "Emily," I whispered, "he destroyed me, and you ran to him?" She looked away, the towel pulled tighter around her shoulders. Her silence was louder than any confession. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, the watch beside me, its tick-tick-tick filling the silence like a metronome of my unraveling. The hollow man stared back at me from every shadow, every reflective surface. My father's photo on the shelf felt heavier than stone, his proud eyes condemning me for failing not only as a man, but as a husband. By dawn, I had reached the edge of myself. Rage, humiliation, despair, they had all burned through me, leaving only ash. But in that ash, a small ember glowed. I realized that Daniel and Emily had taken nearly everything, but not everything. They hadn't taken my ability to choose what came next. They hadn't taken the small ember that whispered, "You are not done. Not yet." I was a hollow man, yes, but a hollow vessel, can be filled again. That was the moment I decided I would not let Daniel write the ending of my story. The morning after I read Daniel's name on Emily's phone, the house felt toxic, like the walls themselves had absorbed the betrayal. Every object was tainted. The framed wedding photo on the mantel mocked me, her smile now a weapon. The bed where we once whispered about our future now felt like a crime scene. I packed a single bag, not with thought, but with instinct. A couple of shirts, jeans, the old leather wallet my father had given me, and the watch that ticked like an unwanted reminder of time wasted. I left the photo of him behind. It was too heavy to carry, not physically, but in spirit. Emily asked where I was going. I didn't answer. Maybe I couldn't. Maybe I didn't owe her the sound of my voice anymore. The car engine roared to life, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to relief. As I drove, the city shrank in the rearview mirror. Skyscrapers turned to suburbs, suburbs to empty fields, until the horizon stretched open like a wound. I rented a cabin 3 hours away, a weathered place near a lake. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. At night, the water reflected the moon like broken glass, and I often sat by it with a bottle in hand, listening to the silence. Silence. It was a different kind here, not the suffocating quiet of my old house. Heavy with judgment, the silence was raw, cleansing. It pressed against me like cold water, forcing me to feel every fracture in myself. The days blurred. I chopped wood though I didn't need it. I walked the trails until my legs ached. I watched the sun sink and rise again, each cycle another reminder that the world didn't pause for my grief. Still, the hollow man followed me. In the mirror above the cabin sink, I caught glimpses of him, gaunt, unshaven, eyes dulled by betrayal. But slowly, something shifted. His gaze wasn't always empty. Sometimes, just sometimes, I saw a spark of defiance. One afternoon, I took the watch off and skipped it across the lake. It bounced once, twice, then sank, swallowed whole. Time had been my tormentor. Every tick a reminder of loss. Watching it vanish beneath the ripples felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. For the first time, I breathed without the tick in my skull. I started keeping a journal. At first, the words were jagged, furious. She betrayed me. He ruined me. Over and over. But as the pages filled, the tone shifted. The anger softened into reflection, then into questions. Who was I before them? Who could I be without them? One night, under a canopy of stars brighter than I had ever seen in the city, I wrote a single line. Hollow does not mean broken. Hollow can be filled. It became my mantra. Sometimes, the loneliness clawed at me. The quiet would turn sharp, cutting into my ribs, reminding me I had no one. On those nights, I heard Emily's laughter in my head or Daniel's condescending smirk. I would grip the edge of the wooden table until my knuckles went white, forcing myself not to drown in their echoes. But then came the small mercies. The older man who ran the bait shop down the road, who gave me fishing tips and never asked why my eyes looked so tired. The stray dog that started following me on my walks, its loyalty silent but steadfast. The way the lake shifted colors with the seasons reminded me that change was not only possible, it was inevitable. And piece by piece, the hollow man inside me began to fill. I didn't have a career. I didn't have a marriage. I didn't even have a plan. But I had the beginning of something I thought I had lost completely. Myself. It wasn't redemption. Not yet. It wasn't justice. But it was survival. And for the first time in months, that felt like enough. Morning light spilled across the cabin floor like liquid gold, cutting through the dust and shadows. I had been in that place long enough to know every creak in the floorboards, every knot in the wood walls, every sound the lake made when the wind touched its surface. And yet that morning felt different. The silence that once pressed down on me like a coffin lid now felt spacious, open, alive. I had survived the storm. But survival, I realized, was just the beginning. The journal on the table was thick with words now. I flipped through its pages, past the jagged confessions of rage, the lonely scrawlings written with shaking hands. Somewhere along the way, my writing had shifted. The ink no longer bled with bitterness. It carried resolve, plans, thoughts sharper than the despair that once blurred them. I wrote a single line at the top of the new page. Today, I begin again. It started small. Push-ups on the cabin floor. Jogging along the gravel roads until my lungs burned and my legs screamed. My body had grown soft from years behind a desk. Nights at the bar. Days trapped in Daniel's shadow. But each drop of sweat was a declaration. I am not the hollow man anymore. The neighbor, the old man from the bait shop, noticed a change. His name was Henry. One afternoon, he invited me for coffee. His home was filled with relics of a life stripped bare, dusty photographs, trophies from better years, bills stacked on the counter. He had once been someone, too, someone who had lost it all when a company collapse took his savings, his marriage, his pride. Over chipped mugs, he told me, a man is not what he loses, but what he builds after the fire. The words lodged in me like a nail. That night, I wrote them in my journal, circling them 3 times. I began building, not just muscle, though the cabin walls could testify to the rhythm of my fists as I shadowboxed in the evenings. Not just endurance, though the lake bore witness to my strokes as I swam across its cold expanse, lungs straining against the water. I built knowledge. With a second-hand laptop, I devoured articles on business ethics, consulting, entrepreneurship, subjects Daniel had once dismissed as irrelevant distractions. I signed up for online courses. Late nights, lit only by the glow of the screen, I took notes, rehearsed speeches, practiced the art of listening. The more I learned, the more I realized Daniel had never been a leader, only a gatekeeper. And gatekeepers fall hardest when the gates are kicked open. Slowly, clients trickled in. Small businesses, entrepreneurs looking for guidance. They didn't care that I no longer had a corner office or a prestigious title. They cared that I listened, that I spoke with clarity, that I offered solutions born not of arrogance but of lived experience. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man Daniel had tried to erase was now building a reputation stronger than the one Daniel had spent decades polishing. The symbols I once carried, as wounds began to shift. The watch, long sunk at the bottom of the lake, still ticked in my mind, but no longer as chains of wasted time. It became a reminder. Time is mine to use, not as a steal. My father's photo, the one I had left behind in the city, haunted me less as a mark of disappointment and more as a quiet guide. I remembered his words, honor is worth more than gold, and realized honor was not found in loyalty to men like Daniel. It was in loyalty to the truth, to myself. Even the hollow man in the mirror had changed. His shoulders were straighter now, his eyes clearer, his jaw firmer. He was not a ghost anymore. He was a man forged in silence. But the transformation wasn't just about me. In my research, I began uncovering things, breadcrumbs Daniel had left behind, questionable contracts, manipulations in quarterly reports, whispers of harassment buried under non-disclosure agreements. At first, I told myself I didn't care. Revenge was poison, and I was done drinking from that cup. But this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. I gathered evidence slowly, methodically, like a hunter setting traps. Old colleagues, once too afraid to speak, began reaching out. They had seen the way Daniel operated, how he cut down anyone who rose too high. Some had stories darker than mine. Some had scars invisible, but deep. Their voices joined mine, quiet at first, then stronger. And with each new piece of proof, I felt the scales tip. Daniel had thought he could erase me, but what he had really done was free me from his cage, give me the space to rise into the man he had feared I could become. One evening, as the sun bled orange into the lake, I sat on the porch with Henry. He smoked a cigarette, his lined face glowing in the twilight. "You're ready," he said simply. "Ready for what?" I asked. To stop running from ghosts, to stop surviving and start living, to go back. His words settled deep inside me. For months, I had avoided the city like it was poisoned. But he was right. Survival had its limits. Rebirth demanded return. I looked at my reflection in the darkening water. The man staring back was not hollow. He was carved sharp by pain, filled with something stronger than pride, conviction. That night, I closed my journal and whispered aloud, as if to the ghosts of Daniel and Emily both. I am no longer yours to break. The next morning, I packed my bag again. Not with desperation this time, but with purpose. Clean clothes. My notes, my evidence. The laptop filled with the stories of those Daniel had wronged. Before I left, I stood at the lake's edge, staring at the ripples where my watch had vanished. For a moment, I imagined it ticking down there in the dark, patient, waiting. Then I turned away. Time was mine again, and I was ready to claim it. I hadn't walked the streets of the city in months, yet the skyline looked smaller somehow, like a stage I had once mistaken for the whole world. My heart thudded in my chest as I approached the glass tower where it had all begun, where Daniel had erased me with a single pink slip. The revolving doors whispered shut behind me. The lobby smelled the same, polished marble and burnt coffee. But the man who walked across it wasn't the ghost who had staggered out months ago. My shoulders were squared, my steps steady. I carried no box of belongings this time, only a slim leather folder tucked under my arm, heavy not with trinkets but with truth. I caught my reflection in the elevator doors. For a flicker of a second, I half expected the hollow-eyed man to stare back, but he was gone. In his place was someone new, forged in silence, sharpened by betrayal, steady by purpose. The door slid open, and I rode to the top floor. The boardroom hadn't changed. The long mahogany table stretched under the weight of men and women in suits, their eyes sharp with calculation, and at the head of it all sat Daniel. He looked older, lines carved deeper into his face, his hair thinner, his smile tighter. But the arrogance was still there, perched on him like a crown made of glass. He hadn't expected me to walk into this room again. "Michael," he said, feigning warmth, his voice slick with oil, "to what do we owe this surprise?" I pulled out a chair, the scrape of wood against the floor sounding louder than it should have. I didn't answer him. Not yet. I laid the folder on the table, sliding it toward the board. Inside, copies of emails, doctor contracts, testimonies from employees too long silenced. A story written in paper and ink, every page a blade sharpened by truth. "I'm not here for your seat," I said finally, my voice even, steady. "I'm here to show them who's been sitting in it." The room grew still. Daniel chuckled nervously, trying to spin it as nonsense. But I watched the board lean forward, their eyes narrowing, hands tightening on pens. They were reading. They were listening. And for the first time, Daniel was sweating. He tried to twist a narrative, painting me as bitter, vengeful, unhinged. But his words bounced off me like rain on steel. I remembered the day he had fired me, how his voice had felt like a gavel sealing my fate. That day I had trembled. Today I didn't flinch. "You said I outshone you," I told him, locking eyes with him across the table. "You were right, but you mistook my light for a threat when it was only proof of how dark you had become." The silence after that was heavier than any applause. One by one, board members questioned him. One by one, he stumbled. The evidence was too clear, the witnesses too credible. Every attempt at denial dug him deeper into the grave he had spent years shoveling. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about balance, about watching truth rise after being buried. At last, the chairwoman closed the folder with a soft thud that sounded, in that moment, like the end of an era. She turned to Daniel, her expression colder than marble. "Gather your things," she said. "You're finished here." Daniel's face drained of color. He looked at me then, not with the smugness I remembered, but with something closer to fear, maybe even recognition. I stood. "Now you know what it feels like," I said, quietly, not loud enough for the board, but enough for him. And then I walked out. The hallways were the same, yet everything felt different. Where once I had carried a box of broken symbols, today my hands were empty, light. In the elevator, I stared at my reflection one last time. And this time, the man looking back wasn't hollow at all. He was whole. Outside, the morning sun cut through the glass tower, throwing long beams of light onto the street. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a watch. Not the one lost in the lake, but a new one I had bought weeks earlier. Simple, unadorned, ticking steady. I fastened it onto my wrist. The circle complete. My father's words drifted back. Honor is worth more than gold. And for the first time, I understood them fully. Honor wasn't about loyalty to a company or even to a marriage. It was about loyalty to myself, to the truth, to the man I had rebuilt from ashes. I walked away from the tower, the city noise swelling around me, and felt the weight of closure settle into my chest. I hadn't taken Daniel's place. I hadn't needed to, because the real victory wasn't that his office was emptied. It was that mine, my soul, my life, my time was full again. I whispered to myself as I disappeared into the morning crowd. I am no longer the hollow man. I am the man who rose from silence. And for the first time in years, the words felt true.